Om. 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 Om Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Welcome. We started studying this book, Buddhist Thought in India, and have just read through the preface and started with the part 1, wherein the discussion is on the Archaic Buddhism or original Buddhism. And in that, the chapter 1 covers the tacit assumptions. Because as we know, Buddhism originated in an already rich cultural and spiritual environment. So the people and their psyche was already imbued with a lot of this spiritual background. Though it does not form part of the Buddhist origination, it is certainly the background in which Buddhism flourished. This particular mode of spiritual thinking flourished from its existing background. So the author was discussing about that environment, particularly saying all the knowledge was based on revelation and the yogic trance than of the European and Western idea of observing phenomena, repeating them, and coming to conclusions or gaining knowledge. So this is the primary difference between the two. And the author mentioned that there are obviously limitations in the scientific approach, so he wants to bring our attention to that. And he also says that possibly the yogis did not venture into the so-called scientific or observation mode of the material facts of this material world, maybe because they thought it was not so important, not worth pursuing. Or maybe they were aware of utility and the benefits, but they thought that is less worth than the revelation that may come through by yogic investigation. Continuing with the further paragraphs here. Of all the infinite facets of the universe, science-bound philosophers will come to know only those which are disclosed to scientific methods. With their ruthless will for boundless power and their disregard for everything except the presumed convenience of the human race. And they cannot prove or even plausibly suggest that this small fraction of the truth about reality is the one most worth knowing about. As for the vast potentialities of the human mind, they will bring out only those which have a survival value in modern technical civilization. Not only is it a mere fraction of the human mind that is being used, but we may well wonder whether it is the most valuable section. Once we consider the ugliness, noisiness, and restlessness of our cities, or the effects which the handling of machines has on workers, there are scientific tools on scientists. At present, it looks as if this mode of life was sweeping everything before it. It also demonstrably sweeps away much that is valuable. So here he is making a particular comment that in the scientific temper, the scientists would ignore all that valuable thing that could be gained through the trance or yogic methods. 2a. He is now talking about the second tacit assumption about the triple world. Turning now to the triple world, we find that the unanimous tradition of the perennial philosophy distinguishes three layers of qualitatively different facts: natural, magical, and spiritual. The constitution of man is accordingly composed of three parts. Reality presents itself on three levels, and threefold is the attitude we can adopt towards events. In man, we have body-mind as the first constituent, the soul as the second, and the spirit as the third. Here, soul should mean more closely to mind. In the objective world, the first level is the body of facts which are disclosed by the senses and scientific observation, and arranged by common sense and scientific theory. The second comprises a great variety of facts which, with some justice, are called occult, because they tend to hide from our gaze. They weighed heavily with our forefathers, but are now widely derided. An example is astrology, or the study of the correspondences which may exist between the position of the celestial bodies on the one hand, and the character, destiny, affinities, and potentialities of people on the other. In addition, this second level includes the activities of the psychic senses, such as clairvoyance, clairaudience, precognition, thought transference, etc. The huge field of myths and mythological figures, the lore about ghosts and the spirits of the departed, and the working of magic, which is said to cause effects in the physical world by means of spells and the evocation of spirits. Thirdly, the spiritual world is an intangible, non-sensuous, and disembodied reality, both one and multiple, both transcending the natural universe and immanent in it, at the same time nothing and everything, quite non-sensory as a datum and rather nonsensical as a concept. So the dual nature of spirit world is talked about, the mystical world, the mind-based world. Indispensable by way of the attributes taken from sensory experience, indescribable by any of the attributes taken from sensory experience, and gained only by the extinguishing of separate individuality, it is known as spirit to the Christians, as emptiness to Buddhists, as absolute to philosophers. Here our senses are blinded, our reason baffled, and our self-interest defeated. So here, about these statements are about the third of the triple world, the spiritual world. The spiritual world is intangible, non-sensuous, and disembodied reality, both one and multiple, both transcending the natural universe and immanent in it, at the same time nothing and everything, quite non-sensory as a datum and rather nonsensical as a concept, indescribable by any of the attributes taken from the sensory experience, and gained only by the extinguishing of separate individuality. It is known as spirit to the Christians, as emptiness to Buddhists, and the absolute to philosophers. Here our senses are blinded, our reason baffled, and our self-interest defeated. So this is the very nature of the spiritual world. spiritual world, where selfishness has no place. The three worlds can be discerned easily in our attitudes. So he's trying to explain this triple world by our attitude towards the events here. Say to cold weather. The common sense reaction is to light a fire, to wear warm clothing, or to take a walk. The magician relies on methods like the tumo of the Tibetans, which are claimed to generate internal heat by means of occult procedures. They are based on a physiology which differs totally from that taught in scientific textbooks and depend on the manipulation of three mystic arteries or nadis, which are described as channels of psychic energy, but which ordinary observation fails to detect, since they are devoid of any physical reality. Finally, the spiritual man either ignores the cold as an unimportant, transitory, and illusory phenomenon, or welcomes it as a means of penance or of training in self-control. So the attitude towards cold weather by a normal, ordinary man, a common man, a mystical man, and a spiritual man is presented, which differ among themselves. Technical progress and scientific habits of thought increasingly restrict us to natural level, because the scientific method, which is based on observation of phenomena and repetition, experimentation, they limit us only to the first level, which is natural level. Magical events and spiritual experiences have ceased to be familiar, and many people do not admit them as facts in their own right. By their own inner constitution, the three realms differ in their accessibility to experience. The rules of evidence are by no means the same in all three, and each has a logic of its own. In the infinitude of the spiritual realm, no particular fact can be seized upon by natural means. And everything in the magical world is marked by a certain indefiniteness, a nebulousness, which springs partly from the way in which the intermediary world presents itself and partly from the uncertainties of its relation to the familiar data of the bright daylight world of natural fact. Every student of the occult knows that in this field the facts are inherently and irremediably obscure. It is impossible to come across even one magical fact which could be established in the way in which natural facts can be verified. There is a twilight about the magical world. It is neither quite light nor quite dark. It cannot be seen distinctly, and like a shy beast, when you point a torch at it, the phenomenon vanishes when the full light is turned on. The situation becomes more desperate still when we consider the spiritual. Here it is quite impossible to ever establish any fact beyond the possibility of doubt. The Buddhists express this by saying that nirvana is signless. That is, it is of such a nature that it cannot be recognized as such. This is really a most disconcerting thought. Spirit is non-sensuous, and we have no sense data to work on. In addition, spiritual actions are disintegrated when reflected upon. If they are not to lose their bloom, they must be performed unconsciously and automatically. Further, to be spiritual, an action must be unselfish. It is in the nature of things quite impossible ever to prove with mathematical certainty that an action has been unselfish, because selfishness is so skillful in hiding itself, because insight into human motives is marred by self-deception. And in any case, at any given time, the motives are so numerous that no one can be sure of having got hold of all of them. So it is difficult to understand human motivation and the variety of motives behind every human action. That's what he's saying here. Immanuel Kant has spoken the last word on this subject when he points out that, quote, "In fact, it is absolutely impossible to make out by experience with complete certainty a single case in which the maxim of an action, however right in itself, rested simply on moral grounds and on the conception of duty." So he's saying, however closely we may observe, it is hard to find an action which is only based on our moral judgment and unselfishness and conception of duty. That is an action being performed by moral judgment, evaluation, and only based on the idea that this is my duty to do and has really no scope for any selfish gain. It is difficult to find that. Sometimes it happens that with the sharpest self-examination, we find nothing beside the moral principle of duty which could have been powerful enough to move us to this or that action and to a great sacrifice. Yet, we cannot infer from that with certainty that it was not really some secret impulse of self-love and the false appearance of that idea that was actual determining cause of the will. So even though by all careful examination we may think that this is a selfless act, justifiable act morally, but still there may be a hidden motive which may appear as a charitable and a wholesome motive, but internally hidden from our own observation, it may be some kind of a self-love, self-gain. We like then to flatter ourselves by falsely taking credit for a noble motive, whereas in fact we can never, even by the strictest examination, get completely behind the secret springs of action. Since when the question is of moral worth, it is not with the actions which we see that we are concerned, but with those inward principles of them which we do not see. So based on to base our evaluation whether an action is worth or not, it is not simply the action that we see that matters. It may be a good action by all evaluation of what we see appearing in front of us, but the motive may not be equally worthwhile. So when we judge about actions, we look into motives, not the appearing action. Here is one of the inescapable difficulties of human situation. All the meaning that life may have derives from contact with the magical and spiritual world. And without such contact, it ceases to be worthwhile, fruitful, and invested with beauty. Means once there is no touch with magical and the spiritual world, the natural action loses its appealing nature. It seems rather stupid to discard the life-giving qualities of these realms simply because they do not conform to a standard of truth situated only to the natural world. Simply because they do not conform to a standard of truth suited only to the natural world. So just because it doesn't conform with the natural world, we cannot discard those important qualities, life-giving qualities of truth, because we are not able to observe them. Where to the scientist phenomena appear worthy of notice only if they are capable of repetition, public observation, and measurement. They are naturally more inaccessible to natural experience than natural things are. The methods of science, mighty and effective though they be, are useless for exploration of 2/3 of the universe. And the psychic and spiritual worlds are quite beyond them. Other faculties within us may well reveal that which the senses fail to see. Other faculties within us may well reveal that which the senses fail to see. If you look at, if we discount the 5 senses of knowledge, eyes, nose, taste, touch, and audition, the other faculties which are more revealing. In Buddhism, faith, mystical intuition, trance, and power of transcendental wisdom. These are the faculties. These are the faculties that we are talking about, which are different and in addition to the sensory faculties we have. In Buddhism, faith, mystical intuition, trance, and power of transcendental wisdom are held to disclose the structure of the spiritual and intermediary worlds, which cannot be revealed by the sensory world. No one can be said to give Buddhist thinking a fair chance if he persists in condemning those sources of knowledge out of hand as completely futile and nugatory. So if we discard the faith and mystical intuition, trance, and the power of transference or transcendental wisdom, if we give up these, then it is not really giving a fair chance to the Eastern philosophical approach. 2b. Next, the perennial philosophy assumes that there are definite degrees of reality. In this book, we will be told that dharmas are more real than things. Dharmas are more real than things. Here, dharmas mean the mental events, let us say mental events, images, emotions, experiences. The images seen in trance more real than the objects of sense perception, and the unconditioned more real than the conditioned. People at present can understand the difference between facts which exist and non-facts which do not exist. But they believe that facts, if real, are all equally real, and that qualitative distinctions between them give no sense. So this is our current understanding, that there are no qualitative differences between the facts. This is the democratic viewpoint in vogue at the present time, which treats all facts as equal, just as all men are said to be equal. In science, nothing has any meaning, and facts are all you ever have. In science, nothing has any meaning. Nothing has any meaning. Meaning, in the sense, they mean something more than that. That's what it means, meaning within quote. And facts are all you ever have. This is the scientific approach. At the time when Buddhism flourished, this would have seemed the highest height of absurdity. Also, the leading European systems of the time, like those of Aristotle and Plotinus, took the hierarchy of levels of reality quite for granted and were indeed entirely based upon it. The lowest degree of reality is pure matter, the highest pure form, and everything else lies somewhere in between. This is even the conception of Aristotle and Plotinus. That's what he says. The higher degrees of reality are more solid and reliable, more intellectually satisfying, and chief of all, they are objectively better than the lower and much more worthwhile. Ens et bonum convertuntur. In consequence, contact with the higher degrees of reality entails a life which is qualitatively superior to one based on contact with the lower degrees. So, it's important. In consequence, contact with the higher degrees of reality entails a life which is qualitatively superior to one based on contact with the lower degrees. This is what sticks in the throat of the present generation. For here, we affirm the judgments of value are not just subjective opinions, which vary with the moods of people, or their tastes or social conditions, but that they are rooted in the structure and order of the objective reality itself. For here we affirm that judgment of value are not just subjective opinions, which vary with moods of people or their tastes or social conditions, but that they are rooted in the structure and order of objective reality itself. If the value of life depends on contact with a high level of reality, it becomes of course important to ascertain what reality is in its own being or svabhava. If the value of life depends on contact with a high level of reality, it becomes of course important to ascertain what reality is in its own being, svabhava. What is reality in itself? Because here we are talking about levels of reality, and here it is said that the value of life depends on being in contact with a higher level of reality. So what is reality itself? What is the svabhava of the reality? And to be able to distinguish that from the lesser realities of comparative fiction, which constitute our normal world of half socialized experience, which we have made ourselves so as to suit our own ends. Because the level of reality we have currently in contact with is lower, so we need to know what is the nature or the highest reality or the svabhava of that reality. To establish contact with worthwhile reality has always been the concern of the exponents of the perennial philosophy. To be able to establish contact with worthwhile reality, means the highest reality, has been the goal and effort of the exponents of perennial philosophy, that is, of most reputable philosophers of both Europe and Asia up to about AD 1450. Here the author tries to say, Edward Conze says that both European and Eastern philosophers definitely had in vision this highest reality because it was the most worthwhile. And this has been the concern of those philosophers. It is just not that the mainstream scientific thinking has always appealed to even the European philosophers. It is the contrary. This is what So far, we will continue with the remaining important method of study. Okay. Om.